everybody. Welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each episode we take a deep dive into one specific character build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and we do our best to optimize it for you to give you the greatest numerical advantage for your chosen role. If you are interested in number crunching and theory crafting for D&D character creation, or if you're looking for ideas on how to make your current or future D&D 5e character as powerful as possible, or you just like talking geeky numbers in a D&D setting, the show's for you. So thanks for being here. You are in the right place. My name is Colby, and I appreciate having you. So today, we are going to do a deep dive on a cleric build, my first ever cleric build for this show. And I have a question. How interested are you, those of you who are watching, if you've become a fan of the show, how interested are you in seeing things other than just sustained DPR, damage per round, builds? Most of the shows that I've done so far have been focused on sustained DPR. I did one on a tanky kind of build, control tanky build, the Bear Totem Barbarian, which I think has been my least viewed and listened to episode, which is fine. I did one on a burst damage build, Nova damage build, which actually ended up being my most viewed, but that's going to change quickly, actually. Otherwise, most of the interest seems to be around kind of these sustained DPR builds that I've been doing. You can probably tell I find them maybe a little more compelling and interesting. I would like to do potentially like another tank build, for example, and compare a sword and shield fighter or paladin to the Bear Totem Barbarian, see which one tends to survive longer in which circumstances, things like that. But when I first thought of doing a cleric build, my initial thought was to do kind of an optimized for healing build, which I haven't done before. But one of my YouTube subscribers, Manuel Roldan, hola Manuel, ¿cómo estás? Kind of pointed out when he asked for a cleric build that, well, you know, optimized for healing is basically light cleric with a magic initiate feat and using, you know, the good berries spell. That's how you're going to get the most healing. Obviously there are other spells, there are other ways, and so maybe you guys are interested in seeing a build that's optimized for healing. Maybe we just do a light cleric with, you know, magic initiate good berries, and we kind of get into what that looks like and what those details are. But maybe most of you don't find that particularly compelling or interesting. So let me know if you do, if you'd like to see something else. But for our purposes today, as is my wont, we are going to be focusing on sustained damage as a cleric. The idea for this particular build was really germinated with our last episode when I was looking at sustained damage spells. And as I'm sure all of you know watching this, and really I knew myself but had never really put two and two together for whatever reason, the cleric has some really great options for sustained damage spells, particularly spirit guardians and spiritual weapon, which we're kind of focusing this build on. You know, there are these spells that you cast them once, and then for an entire minute or more you get damage out of them without having to cast more spells and use up more spell slots. So, you know, I started thinking about, okay, how am I going to optimize a cleric build around these two spells? And looked at, you know, a variety of different cleric domains. Then there's some that are, you know, decent options. The war domain's okay. The Arcana domain is particularly good for single target damage and using a weapon, using Booming Blade as your primary action every turn. You get some nice buffs as an Arcana cleric. But the one that I found most compelling and unique and interesting, and that we are going to focus on this episode, is the Death domain. So, episode 11, the Death Cleric. Primary reasons for wanting to focus on the death domain. This build really excels at doing damage to multiple targets, sustained damage to multiple targets, which I have yet to do. I've been focused only on single target when I'm looking at specific sustained DPR builds anyway. And so that was cool and different. And also, this is all spell damage, 100% spell damage, which I just love the idea of playing this cleric. You've got armor, you've got a shield, you're wading into battle, healing, buffing, laying waste to hordes of undead, and just having, you know, all of these multiple sources of spell damage going off. It felt like a really cool and fun and unique concept. And so that's why we decided to go this route. Now, similar to the Bard build that I did a couple of episodes ago, the Bard Locker, you know, my thinking here was when you play a cleric, similar to when you play a Bard, you probably, most people anyway, play a cleric because they want to be a cleric. They want to do cleric-y things. They want to heal and resurrect their fallen allies and, you know, again, turn and destroy undead and buff and also do damage, right? And so I didn't want to do, I wanted to try and do a pure cleric or nearly pure cleric build, you know, without having to go into multiple levels of a martial class, you know, for sustained damage to get, you know, 2 attacks per round, things like that. So that was another reason why the death domain was so appealing, because with just doing, you know, all spell damage, it kept me from having to try and find a way to get multiple attacks, weapon attacks per turn in order to do good sustained damage. So that's kind of the concept for this character. Wading into battle, doing damage to multiple targets per round, and being as strong a cleric as you can possibly be. So let's jump into the build. One note before we get into the level-by-level build. Again, as I mentioned, this build, when I talk about the numbers, when I'm crunching the numbers and comparing them to other builds like I do on my master sustained DPR spreadsheet that you can find, as always, in the show notes and in the video description. Keep in mind, again, this is for 2 targets. Most of those, well, all the other sustained damage builds that I've ever done are for single target. Now, of course, sometimes, and oftentimes, you would prefer, I would say more often than not, you would prefer to have all of your damage being done to a single target because of the way action economy works in D&D, right? Taking out one target as quickly as possible is usually the smart way to go, as opposed to doing maybe more damage but to multiple targets, so they kind of both stay alive for a little bit longer than they maybe otherwise would, right? You focus fire, you take out one enemy at a time, and now he doesn't get an action and a chance to do damage to you and or help his allies, etc. Because the numbers are very, very strong. And so keep that in mind, that we're talking 2 targets. It's not just a single target here. Also, most of the damage that this build does comes in the form of spells. In fact, all of the damage is going to be coming in the form of spells, which is really cool. Because, you know, you can be a cleric and be in there mixing it up with the baddies, but you're just spellcasting. 2 of the 3 damage sources are going to be not enemy armor class dependent, but enemy wisdom save. So if they make their save or not, that's going to determine how much damage they do. So most of the damage is going to be dependent on whether or not the enemy makes their save. So when I put the graphs together, I calculated it based on that, you know, starting off with a +0 to their wisdom save all the way down to a +15 to their wisdom save, as opposed to going enemy armor class. Spiritual weapon does depend on enemy armor class, and it was a little too complicated or too much work or too difficult to easily quantify. If I were to say, okay, well, if the enemy AC is X and the enemy plus to wisdom save is Y, then here's the damage you would do. It was too much. So I'm just crunching my numbers and assuming, the enemy wisdom save, their plus to wisdom save, when I tell you what the potential average numbers are going to be at certain levels and things. Basically, I'm assuming that the enemy armor class is 10 for the purpose of spiritual weapon. So that's a long way of saying that when I talk about the numbers, keep in mind it's doing damage to 2 targets, not 1. And if their armor class is higher than a 10, your numbers might be slightly lower. Also, if the enemies aren't standing next to each other, they might be slightly lower. I'll talk about that in a second. But of course, if there are more than 2 enemies that your spirit guardians are hitting, the numbers could be better. So, these are averages, right? And when we make comparison in the master sustained damage spreadsheet that I keep, when we make comparison to the other classes and how much damage they do, again, it's not armor class, so the numbers are going to be a little off, right? When you see those graphs and you see those lines and you see those numbers, I'm not talking for the sake of the Death Cleric armor class. I'm talking plus to wisdom save. Now, the reality is most enemies have a pretty lousy plus to wisdom save, so you should actually compare a little more favorably as a Death Cleric at the certain levels when compared to other sustained damage classes than the graphs show, even, because the chances of you running into, say, for example, an enemy with at +5 to their wisdom save is not as high as running into an enemy with a +15 to their, with a 15 armor class at level 6, for example, when we crunch the numbers and use 15 as the baseline for calculating our damage, right? I hope that all makes sense. Let me know if you have questions or if that's confusing in any way. Anyway, onto the build. All right, so at level 1. Now, if I were playing this character in game, I would start at level 1 as a fighter for a few reasons, and they're all defensive and utility focused. First of all, you get more hit points, right? 10 hit points starting off, which is nice. More importantly, you get proficiency in your constitution saves. And since so much of the damage that this character does is coming from a concentration spell, Spirit Guardians, maintaining that concentration thanks to a better con save is really important. So that would be really big for this build. You get heavy armor proficiency, so you can start with chainmail, which is nice. Just give you a nice bump to your AC. It gives you a great fighting style, which I would probably take either protection or defense to allow you to either have a better armor class or even with your reaction impose disadvantage on an enemy when they're attacking an ally, which is really cool and very cleric-y, I think, right? So anyway, if I were, that's what I would do. However, because we are optimizing this build for DPR, I'm going to go just straight cleric so that we can kind of get to all of our, higher level spells at the right time, and it just will compare more favorably, basically, and do better damage to other sustained damage builds. So keep that in mind as a great option. So at level 1, with this character going straight cleric, your race is going to be variant human. Now, once Tasha's cauldron of everything comes out, that may change. It may be that there are better options, or that you can take that free feat that variant humans get with another race. I'm not really sure. Someone will probably correct me here or verify that in the comments if you want to. But for now, variant human, because free feat is so strong if you're taking a feat, and we are. The free feat that you want is Warcaster. So for those who don't know, Warcaster is fantastic. It gives you advantage when you're trying to maintain concentration on a spell. That's the main reason we're taking it here, again, because so much of your damage is coming from concentration. And you get some nice other bonuses. You get to cast spells that have somatic components, even if you have a shield and a weapon in your hands, right? And you can cast a spell, a cantrip, or maybe any spell actually. You can cast a spell as a reaction, as an opportunity attack when you get a chance to make an opportunity attack, right? And so that can be nice. So take Warcaster as your free feat. Your ability scores, basically assuming a point buy, you're going to buy 15 wisdom and then give it a +1 from your human. So you'd have a 16. 15 constitution, +1, so 16 constitution. I'd go strength 14 for those times when you need to make a weapon attack. And then, put the other points in whatever you want. For your equipment, make sure you get a shield, and then I'd just do a mace. That seems appropriate for clerics, and some scale mail. So you've got a decent AC. It could be better. If you started fighter, it would be a little better. For your spells, the only one that I'm going to really tell you to make sure you get is Toll the Dead. Toll the Dead is a cantrip, and the way it works at level 1 is that it does a D8, 1d8 of damage to a target. Unless they've taken damage already, then it does a D12. And when we crunch the numbers, by the way, for our purposes, we're just going to assume that they've taken damage. So we're always going to be using D12s when we're calculating that damage. They get a wisdom save, and if they make their save, they take no damage. That kind of stinks, but it's no worse than, swinging it with your weapon and missing, right? So Toll the Dead is great, and the reason we're going to actually be using Toll the Dead for our action all the time, and the reason is because as a Death Domain cleric, and so by the way, you get to choose a domain at level 1. You're going to take Death Domain. And one really awesome feature about Death Domain is the Reaper feature. So any necromancy cantrips, of which Toll the Dead is one, if it's a single target cantrip that does necrotic damage, then it will hit 2 targets instead of 1, as long as the targets are within 5 feet of each other. So I know that's a big caveat. And again, we're assuming that you are attacking 2 targets that are standing next to each other when we crunch the numbers. So one more little asterisk, right, to include here. But as long as the targets are within 5 feet of each other, you Toll the Dead on 1, and it hits both of them. So it's doing D12 to target 1, D12 to target 2, and that's going to scale as you level up. So it's very strong. At level 2, you get your Channel Divinity, which all clerics have, which is really cool. Basically, it lets you, when you use your Channel Divinity, you make a melee attack, and it lets you do 5 times your cleric level in damage, which is quite powerful and gives you a nice little Nova burst damage option. It's not great at level 1, obviously, but as you level up, it'll scale nicely. We're not going to try and quantify that when we're looking at sustained damage, because you only get to use it once per short rest right now anyway. So not really sustainable, but a nice Nova damage option. At level 3, make sure that as a spell you take Spiritual Weapon. We've talked about Spiritual Weapon before. It's a very strong spell, especially because it doesn't require concentration. So you cast Spiritual Weapon, and it summons a magic weapon, and then as your bonus action on future rounds, you can use it to make an attack. You use your Wisdom modifier. It's a spell attack still. So you make a weapon attack. It does add your Wisdom modifier, your spellcasting modifier, which for you is Wisdom, and it does a D8 plus your spellcasting modifier. So a nice little way to weaponize your bonus action here. You will be casting that all the time. At level 4, you get an ability score increase or feat, of course, and I'd recommend bumping your Wisdom. So you were at 16, now your Wisdom is at 18, which is great. It's going to give you all of the most important things that you need for your spells and your difficulty checks and everything like that, for your enemies to try and resist your spells. At level 5, you do get the Destroy Undead feature, which is really cool as a clerics. As clerics, you can always use your divine, your channel divinity for turn undead, but now you get to destroy undead if the undead is a challenge rating of 1/2 or less, and they fail their save. They just die instead of run away in fear, right? Which is awesome, and that will scale as you it'll go to a challenge rating of 1, then 2, then 3 as you level up, which is great and really fun. A really fun part of being a cleric. Excuse me. You now get level 3 spells, and you're going to take your most important spell, which is Spirit Guardians. So for those who don't know, Spirit Guardians, the way it works, you cast it, and then anytime a character first enters into the radius of the spell, which is 15 feet from you in every direction, so you've got a nice 30-foot diameter bubble right around you. And anytime an enemy first enters into or starts their turn inside that radius, they're going to take damage, and it's good damage. It's 3d8. They get a wisdom save to take half. So even if they make their save, they only take half. It's really strong. And so what you're going to be doing essentially from this point on is running into a pack of enemies, right? Casting Spirit Guardians and casting Spiritual Weapon, and then as your action using Toll the Dead. So, we're assuming that there's at least 2 targets that are within range of you, within that 15 or 30 foot really bubble. Find 2 that are standing next to each other. They're going to be taking damage from Spirit Guardians. Both of them are going to be taking damage from Toll the Dead, which, by the way, is a 2d12 per target now, because it scales as all damaging cantrips do. So 2d12 per target, plus 3d8 from Spirit Guardians per target, and then one of them is going to also get knocked on the head with your spirit weapon, your spiritual weapon. So that's fantastic, and it's a lot of damage per round. At level 6, you get the inescapable destruction feature as a Death Domain cleric, which basically is going to let your spells ignore necrotic resistance if the enemy has resistance to necrotic damage, which is fantastic. Now it's going to be even harder for them to not take damage from all of the spells that you're hitting them with each round. And your channel divinity does get bumped to 2 times per short rest. You can use it twice per short rest, so that's great. Damage report. Damage report at level 6. So again, versus 2 enemies, assuming you can hit 2 enemies with everything that you're trying to hit them with, if they have a +0 to their wisdom save, you're going to be doing 49 damage per round, again, between the 2. If they have a +5 to their wisdom save, which is very rare, by the way, at this level, you will be doing 39 damage per round, so only about a quarter less. That's very strong. Again, it's to 2 targets, so you're not necessarily focus firing and taking one out quickly, but once the one that your party's trying to take out dies, the one standing next to him is going to almost be dead already too, which is really cool. All right, at level 7, you now have level 4 spells, and so Spirit Guardians can be upcast to a level 4 spell, meaning it will do 4d8 per round. Now, keep in mind, Spirit Guardians will do an extra d8 of damage per level that you upcast it at. Spiritual Weapon will only do an extra d8 of damage every 2 levels. So you get it as a 2nd level spell, then as a 4th level spell, it'll do 2d8 instead of 1d8. At a 6th level spell, it'll do 3d8 instead of 2d8, right? So it's good to upcast Spiritual Weapon, but Spirit Guardians is going to take priority. If you're low on spell slots or you only have 1, high level spell slot, I'd advise using it for Spirit Guardians. It scales a little bit better, and it does damage to multiple targets instead of 1. Of course, you know, you're a cleric. You may be actually trying to save those spell slots for things like resurrect or revivify or, you know, some really powerful buff or something like that. But I just want to explore the possible here for damage per round, right? At level 8, you get another ability score increase. I would recommend going with Wisdom. So again, you have now capped your Wisdom. You're at a 20. And that's very strong. It helps your difficulty check. It helps, you know, your heals, your damage, everything. You also get at level 8 as a Death Cleric, Divine Strike. Divine Strike does 1d8 necrotic damage per weapon attack. So when you make a weapon attack, you get an extra d8 of necrotic damage. That's great, except for that we're not making weapon attacks, right? We're using Toll the Dead as our action, and 2d12 is better than 1d8 generally. Again, depending on the enemy's armor class versus their plus wisdom save. You know, but your strength is probably only a 14. It's going to be harder for you to hit, probably. Something that I want to mention here. In the player's handbook, there's a little note on clerics, and it says the following. Rule tip, Divine Strike versus Potent Spellcasting. The divine domains in the player's handbook each give a cleric one of 2 features at 8th level, either Divine Strike or Potent Spellcasting. If the clerics of a domain typically rely on weapon use, those clerics get Divine Strike. Other clerics get Potent Spellcasting. So obviously Wizards has decided here that the Death Domain Cleric is typically going to focus on weapon use and therefore gave them Divine Strike. I think there's a good argument to be made here with your Dungeon Master that the way that this tip is worded almost seems like, you know, if you're primarily a weapon using cleric, you get Divine Strike. If you're primarily a casting cleric, you get Potent Spellcasting. And you just might be able to convince your DM to let you take Potent Spellcasting at this level because you don't use your weapons. You are a spellcasting cleric. And therefore, as per this official rule tip in the player's handbook, you should get Potent Spellcasting. Depending on your DM, they might allow it. And Potent Spellcasting would be great because it would allow you to add your Wisdom modifier to your damaging spells. I believe it's just your cantrips. Ooh, I should have looked that up, right? I think it's just your cantrips, and I'll confirm that later when I edit this. But still, that's a nice damage bump to your DPR. So see if you can convince your Dungeon Master of that at level 8. At level 9, you now get level 5 spells, meaning that your Spirit Guardians will do 5d8 per round, and that's fantastic. So, damage report. Again, against 2 enemies, assuming all of that they're standing next to each other, and they have a +0 to their Wisdom save, you're going to be doing 75 damage per round total, which is a lot. And versus 2 enemies standing next to each other with a +6 to their Wisdom save, you will be averaging, and again, of course, these are all averages, right? 61 damage per round. That's awesome. Skipping ahead a little bit, level 11. So you're Toll the Dead now does 3d12 per target if they fail their save, which is awesome. And you have 6th level spells. So your Spirit Guardians are going to do 68, and your Spiritual Weapon, when you cast it at a 6th level spell, is going to do 3d8 per turn, plus, of course, your Wisdom modifier, which is great. Speaking of your Wisdom modifier, at level 12, you get another ability score increase. Your Wisdom's capped, so I guess not speaking of your Wisdom modifier, I would go Constitution. It's going to help you maintain concentration. It's going to give you more hit points. And Constitution is a pretty important save against enemies generally. So yeah, go Con. At level 13, you now have 7th level spells, so Spirit Guardians is doing 7d8 per turn per target. and a damage report at level 13. So against 2 targets with a +0 to their wisdom save, you're going to be averaging 109 damage per round. You have joined the Centennial Club. Congratulations. Again, there's a lot of asterisks there. You know, assuming 2 targets, assuming they're standing next to each other, but still really strong. Against 2 enemies standing next to each other with a +7 to their wisdom save, very rare, you're still doing 85. Really good. Again, on average. At level 14, Divine Strike now does 2d8, an extra 2d8 of damage. So you hit him with a weapon attack, and then you get an extra 2d8. That's nice, unless you've convinced your Dungeon Master to give you potent spellcasting, in which case you don't get anything cool. But, you know, if you have Divine Strike, there are probably times where you'll want to be using a weapon attack instead of casting Toll the Dead, especially if there's not 2 targets standing next to each other. You're just going after a single target, and they have a low AC or a high plus to save on their wisdom. So keep that in mind. At level 15, your Spirit Guardians now does 8d8 of damage per turn when the enemy is starting their turn in your area of influence anyway, or they first enter it. And Spiritual Weapon does 48 per round if you're using a 7th level spell slot, or I mean an 8th level spell slot. At level 16, you get another ability score increase or feat. I'd cap your Constitution, take your Constitution to 20 for the reasons that we've already discussed. At level 17, Toll the Dead. Toll the Dead is 4d12 per target. That's quite good, especially since it's often going to be hitting 2 targets. You do get an improved Reaper feature. So the Reaper feature, again, was for cantrips only, right? If they're standing next to each other, cantrips, necrotic damage, necromantic cantrips, then it affects both of them. Now, it's any necromantic spell that usually targets 1 will target 2 if they're standing next to each other. That's not exactly sustainable, right? Because my goal here is to spend as few spell slots as possible. Usually I'll only do 1 spell slot. We're actually using 2, so it's already borderline going against my rules. So if you're also using your action to cast spells every turn, I don't consider that sustainable. However, there will be times where that will be a good option for you to do. Your best option against low Constitution save targets will be Harm, which is a 6th level spell. It does 14d6 of damage, which is awesome. Blight, at 9th level, when cast at 9th level, does 13d8 of damage. That's fantastic. Best option against low AC targets that are in melee range is just good old Inflict Wounds. You know, at level 1, it's 3d10 of damage, which is really not as good as Toll the Dead, frankly. But, you know, if you upcast it a little bit, I mean, it can be as much as 11d10 at 9th level. So, you know, some good on-demand burst damage, Inflict Wounds, and you could couple that, right, with your Channel Divinity for a lot of damage. 17 times 5, numbers. You know, that's a lot of on-demand burst damage, Nova damage for you. So Spirit Guardians, of course, at 9th level is going to do 9d8 per round, 9d8 per round, not 98. And damage report. Against 2 targets with a +0 to their wisdom save, you are averaging 147 total damage per round. And against 2 targets with a +8 to their wisdom save, again, rare, even at this level, a whopping 110. So you're still topping 100 damage per round, divided amongst 2 targets. Very strong. So final thoughts on this particular build. So much fun, right? To be able to be able to be a cleric and to just wade into battle with your shield and your armor and your holy symbol and your mace and really just slinging spells. You've got ghosts, circling about. You've got a spiritual weapon hitting people. You're tolling the dead on targets, all while you're resurrecting your allies and laying waste to hordes of undead and healing and buffing and doing all of these things. Just lots of options. Very powerful, very fun. So I actually look forward to creating this character in a future campaign and seeing what it's capable of doing. I'm going to do away with DM tips going forward. If you strongly object to that decision, let me know. But for those of you who like to dungeon master, you're smart and you know how to, if you've got a character that's unbalancing your encounters or your campaign in general, you know better than I do, I'm sure, how to try and bring that back into balance. And in the interest of time, we're just going to forego DM tips going forward. So that's our show for the week. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate you. As always, please subscribe, like, share, comment, all of the things. We're up to 150 subscribers, so that was quick. From last week, we were just at 100, so thank you. And hopefully we can keep this momentum going. As always, if you want to communicate with me, feel free to reach out via social media, on Facebook, Twitter, less so on Instagram these days. My email is dndoptimized@gmail.com. And you can also comment on the, where comments are allowed in YouTube, I guess, anyway. Feel free to comment. I try to respond to all of those. I hope that I get to the point where I can't do that any longer, because that would mean I'm getting a lot of comments. But for now, I'm doing my best to reply to all of them. Of course, if you have a specific build that you would like me to do an episode on, please let me know. Give me some details of what you're looking for exactly, how you envision the character to be built a little bit. I've taken inspiration already from several suggestions and asks. I've got some lined up that the challenge has been thrown down and accepted by me, so I need to create some builds as per some requests from some of you. I'll get to them eventually. Be patient. Thanks for your patience. But yeah, let me know, and I will do my best to optimize it for you. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic day.